Okay, I am Dr. O'Kay and we're back for another Okay, Not Okay podcast. And today we're talking about suspensions, terminations, and fines, or STFs. Now every week on Dr. O'Kay, you see me hand out many suspensions, not really any terminations, and a whole bunch of fines. But let's talk about what each of those mean, and then at the end we'll go over our half-year leaderboard for STFs. So let's work backwards. First, terminations. These are really hard to get in the WWE because you just expect a lot of violence. So we reserve these for the most brutal and even deadly attacks. Now these are so hard that we have not actually seen any terminations handed out in 2024. However, there is one caveat to this. The Wyatt 6 debut. That absolutely would have been an immediate termination for all 5 members of the Wyatt 6. As we saw the Firefly Funhouse members take out everyone backstage. We have not gotten any resolution to what happened there, but we saw 20-30 people laid out backstage, completely injured. There's bloody messes everywhere on the floor, on the wall. Chad Gable looked like he may have been shot in the head. Fortunately, he was okay, and we don't know the status of anybody else. It seems like Adam Pearce has completely covered up what happened that week. Just because we didn't know anyone else who got hurt other than Gable, it's totally been swept under the rug. So I don't know what's going on there, but WWE really needs to do something and let the public know, because it was completely uncalled for and we would have gotten rid of all of those members. But since they were not WWE employees at the time, and as far as I know, they still are not, so they cannot be fired from a place for which they don't work. So they got nothing. And right now it seems like they're getting away with it, as Bo Dallas was able to have a meeting with Pearce. And then this week he was just allowed to go to ringside to meet up with Chad Gable. But Gable did get the better of him this week since he and the Creed brothers took him out, but I don't know what we're going to see going forward. It can't be anything good. So I think if they become employees of the WWE, they will quickly get terminated. But they haven't attacked anyone since that first night, so I don't know what to say. We'll just have to wait and see. But let's talk about one attack that was very close to a termination, and that was on the May 20th Monday Night Raw. Braun Breaker had a one-on-one match against NXT's Kale Dixon, and as you would expect, Breaker took care of him very easily. He landed 3 spears on Dixon and then looked like he was going to attack him with the steel steps. However, he put the steel steps down and Dixon's head was laying on top of the steel steps when Breaker decided to get a steel chair and slam Dixon's head with the chair while it was still laying on the steel steps. That is a truly dangerous situation. Obviously, Dixon had to go to the hospital. We don't know what is up with Dixon since then. Hopefully he is okay. Obviously, he didn't come back to Monday Night Raw since he's an NXT superstar, but that was a deadly attack. Hopefully Dixon has recovered or will recover and will be able to resume his wrestling career. But that one certainly could have been a career ender, so we were very, very close to giving Breaker a termination. That said, we held off and only gave him a 4-week suspension at that time. But as you can see, for these deadly attacks, we're getting very close to handing out a termination. So let's take a step down from terminations and go to suspensions. Now, these can be a wide variety of different things. These are your standard illegal and vicious attacks at ringside, that happen anytime, before a match, during a match, after a match, when there's no match scheduled at all. Just when two people might be talking, or just coming up from the backside and hitting someone. It could be anything, but if it's a vicious attack, it could be a suspension. Now, also, most attacks that happen backstage are given suspensions instead of fines, because these attacks happen when the other person is probably not on guard for an attack. There's no reason you should expect to be attacked backstage. So unless you two are squaring off and you know you're just ready for a one-on-one good old brawl, it's more likely than not you're going to see suspension when you get an attack backstage. Now, when you're inside the ring, during matches, these are illegal actions that directly lead to decisions or disqualifications, if you will, and they are particularly strictly enforced during championship matches. They could be any sort of attack during a match that the ref doesn't see and gets away with, but oftentimes these will get suspensions instead of just fines. One other type of suspension we have to talk about are physical attacks against a non-wrestler. And there are many types of non-wrestlers. They can be referees, they can be managers, they can be the general managers, they can be security guards, or just any other backstage official, any fan even. I don't know why you would attack a fan, but that might even go to termination status, but at least a suspension for anyone who is not a wrestler, or even not serving in a wrestler's capacity who has wrestled before. You're probably going to see a suspension instead of a fine. But let's take it one step down and talk about fines. These are your standard illegal, but not particularly vicious attacks at ringside. During matches, these can be illegal actions to gain an advantage, but do not necessarily directly cause a match to be won or lost. They could just be something that happens very quickly in the middle of a match, and maybe you just get flipped off of your feet for a second. That's probably just a fine, as that's pretty easily recoverable most of the time, unless that person immediately hits their finishing move and gets the win. But under most circumstances, those will just get a fine. Also, any other minor unsportsmanlike actions that are not necessarily physical, such as being particularly and unnecessarily rude to, say, the general manager when you're arguing with him, that could get raised up to a fine at least, but we don't see that very often. Most arguments don't get too many fines, but it can happen in the WWE. Lastly, and this is what happens most often, the instigator of an attack or a fight usually picks up a fine. Maybe there are two people that are not very happy with each other, or they have an upcoming match and things turn physical. Usually it's the person that swings first that will pick up a fine in what's otherwise a fair fight, because while we expect there to be some physicality in WWE, those that are not sanctioned, they at least need to be handled with appropriately, that this was not the time to have that fight. We really want that to be saved for an official sanctioned bout. And lastly, the main thing that does not get a fine is the person who fights back against an instigator, or a person who makes a save against someone who has been or is going to be attacked imminently. So we see a lot of these happen. They come out of the back, run down the ramp and into the ring and make the save for someone who is already getting beaten up. And we just don't want to see that, so for their heroism, they do not pick up any fines. And lastly, you can also pick up 2 or more STFs in a single show or a single segment even, if they were different, distinct actions. Maybe one took place during the match and one took place after the match. We see that a lot. So you can certainly pick up more than one STF in a given week, and that happens all of the time. So let's get to a couple of examples of these from this week's Raw, because we really did have a wide variety of them just to nail down what we're talking about here. So let's start with fines. We had Pete Dunne making a save for Sheamus after his match. He had just defeated Big Bronson Reed, but Reed looked like he was going to attack Sheamus from behind. But Dunne came out of the crowd and hit a running knee to stop Reed from doing so. Dunne did not get a fine for that action, as Reed was imminently going to do something to Sheamus, but Reed also did not get anything because maybe he could have changed his mind at the last minute and not done anything. Probably not, but we can't say for sure. So he did not get anything for that action. But we did then see Dunne turn around after he had left the ring and attack Sheamus in the back for no apparent reason, which maybe we'll find out about this week. Who knows? But Dunne picked up a fine for that. It was not a vicious attack, but it was certainly an attack that was not called for any reason. So Dunne got a fine. Then, to make matters worse, Reed, who was still mad, he then decided to hit a tsunami on Sheamus. And no, a finishing move in and of itself is not a vicious attack. It is certainly one that hurts quite a bit, especially when you have a 330-pound or more gentleman flying and landing on top of you, but still not vicious, so for Reed, this was just a fine. Next, let's talk about some suspensions. Well, our main one that we want to point out here was Drew McIntyre this week. He was arguing with Pearce in the middle of the ring, trying to get himself unsuspended and to get a match with CM Punk at SummerSlam. Well, even though the two were arguing, neither side got anything for that action. However, Pearce required McIntyre to apologize to the two refs that he had pushed during the post-show after Money in the Bank. Well, of course, McIntyre said no to this, and then he ended up physically pushing both refs. And as we said before, physical altercations with WWE officials usually get you a suspension. And then, on top of it, McIntyre, after he had left the ring after getting super kicked by Seth Rollins, he did end up giving gentle pushes to force different security guards who were there to take him away, and he walked back. Now, these were not very rough pushes by any means. We could probably let him get away with it. But when you put those together with the two pushes of the refs, we decided to give McIntyre a 2-week suspension. And lastly, let's talk about a double STF that we just talked about. Well, let's go to the Sonya Deville versus Zelina Vega match. Almost immediately, Zoe Stark distracted the referee, which allowed Shayna Baszler to stomp Zelina's elbow up against the mat. So when Zelina went back into the ring, Sonya was immediately able to hit the DeVille's advocate and won the match. So for that, it led directly to Sonya's win. So because Zoe and Shayna were working together to make this happen, they both got a suspension. But that wasn't all for them, because they kept going after the match. So Shayna, Zoe, and Sonya all worked together to beat up Zelina after the match. I don't know why Zelina particularly deserved that, but the three of them wanted to make a statement. Now, this was obviously an unfair fight that Zelina was prepared for in no way, but it had not yet turned vicious when Lyra Valkyria and Carter and Chance came out to make the save. So for this, we have to just give the three of them a fine. So this gave both Shayna and Zoe both a suspension during the match and a fine after the match. Still one segment, but two separate STFs. Let's do our countdown of the top 5 men on Raw, men on SmackDown, women on Raw, and women on SmackDown. So let's start with suspensions only for the men on Raw. Coming in at number 5, Finn Balor with 5. Then we have a tie for number 3 with JD McDonough and Braun Breaker with 6. At number 2, Dominic Mysterio at 7. I think you can see a pattern forming there. And then in first place for suspensions with 9, it is Drew McIntyre. I guess we can't be surprised. McIntyre has been a madman going after that World Heavyweight Championship all year, and he's gone through anyone he needed to try to get to it. Plus, when things don't work out his way, he usually goes ballistic thereafter. And so maybe he'll finally get a chance to put his hands on CM Punk at SummerSlam if he can stay civil enough to be unsuspended. Then, total STFs. A lot the same, but in 5th place with 13, we have Damian Priest. Then in 4th place with 14, Drew McIntyre. And in 3rd place with 16, Dominic Mysterio. In 2nd place with 17, JD McDonough. And in 1st place with 19, Finn Baszler. Well, I think you can sense an obvious theme here. It is the Judgment Day. You would expect it completely though, as I usually start STFs by saying, and in this week's Judgment Day edition, and that turned out to be the case. We have had 29 Monday Night Raws so far, and Baszler has 19 STFs. So he's certainly averaging more than one every other week. And since there's so many people in the Judgment Day, if he's not there to get an STF, somebody else is also there to share the love. So certainly 4 out of the 5 spots here, all Judgment Day members. And we'll probably check in at the end of the year and see Carlito there if the Judgment Day can keep their act together. Then for the men on SmackDown, suspensions only, we first have a tie for 5th place with Tonga Loa and Logan Paul with 5. In 4th place, we surprisingly have Jimmy Uso with 6. Jimmy, we have not seen you since the SmackDown after WrestleMania when you were taken out by Solo Sikoa and Tama Tonga. So it's pretty impressive that you only needed 3 months to still stay in 4th place for the most suspensions. Well, let's go to 3rd place. With 8 of them, it's Kevin Owens. In 2nd place, with 9, it's Tama Tonga. And in 1st place, it is the new Tribal Chief, Solo Sikoa, with 12. For total STFs, we have a tie for 4th place, AJ Styles and Kevin Owens with 10. Then in 3rd with 11, we have Logan Paul. Then in 2nd, it is Tama Tonga with 12. Very impressive since he basically took Jimmy's place in the bloodline, so he was not there for the first 3 months and only picked up after WrestleMania. And yet he finds his way into 2nd place. And of course, in 1st, as you would expect, Solo Sikoa with 16. He doesn't always get his hands dirty, but he's there plenty often enough to hit that Samoan spike to pick up both a suspension and at least a fine. So he's got 16 total STFs out of 28 SmackDowns. Yet again, he's got more than one every other week. Let's flip to the women now. First on Raw, suspensions only. In 5th place, we're not going to name them. It's a 6-way tie with 2. Then we have a 3-way tie for 2nd with Liv Morgan, Scarlett, and Io Sky with 3. And we have a surprising 1st place winner here. It is Becky Lynch with 4. We have not seen much of Becky since the day after Crown Jewel when she lost her rematch to Liv Morgan, and she has been out ever since. Hopefully she comes back soon, but still impressive to have the lead still with 4. So for total STFs, we have a tie for 4th place with Kairi Sane and Dakota Kai with 8. They usually work together in their business, so it makes sense that they have the same number. Then in 3rd place, Liv Morgan with 9, certainly getting a lot of them helping out the Judgment Day every week. And then we have a tie for 1st place. You would not be surprised to expect Io Sky with 10, with her Damage Control buddies right behind her. But Scarlett with 10 of them. She is not even someone who ever makes physical contact. But she's just part of schemes every single week with the Final Testament that she finds her way to at least a fine, if not a suspension, as much as anybody else on the women's roster for Raw. So let's go to SmackDown Women. We have first for suspensions only, we have a 4-way tie for 3rd place with 2, Piper Niven, Bayley, Tiffany Stratton, and Elektra Lopez. Then in second place with 3 by herself, it's Chelsea Green. And in first place with 6, doubling the second place person, is Nia Jax. Certainly no surprise there. She just likes to show off her power and overwhelm anyone anytime she sees the opening, so I don't think we can be shocked at all to see her in first place. Now for total STFs, we have a tie for fourth place, Bayley and Chelsea both with 5. Then in third place, it's Tiffany with 6. In second, we have Elektra Lopez with 8, and amazingly, she has only had 2 matches herself, so most of the time she's doing business for the men in Legado del Fantasma. So she's certainly found her way to annoying a lot of people to pick up 8 STFs. And in first place, yet again, no surprise, it is Nia Jax. So there you have it. That's our just past halfway list for STFs. So hopefully you at least have a little better understanding when I talk about STFs in our 2 main shows every single week. So until next time, I'm Dr. OK, and this has been the OK Not OK podcast.